Hi, I'm Trisha at Club Scrap. Welcome to the Petite Book Duo Workshop. We've got 2 books to make, but for the actual class, I'm just going to show you how to make one of them since the other is assembled exactly the same way. So first we'll sort our papers, then we'll trim everything needed for the book, and then we'll assemble it step by step. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's go ahead and get started. Now this is where we're headed, 2 complete books. So we'll go ahead and make this one together, and you can make one with the red spine and a different print if you like on your second go. Everything will be queued up for you to do that. So to begin, any kit, whatever kit you're using, you can just take the prints and divide them into 2 piles, and then the plain colors as well. And in this case, I've got 2 reds, I've got 2 blues, I've got 2 greens, so I'm making 2 piles, 1 for each color in the collection, and that's how all of our collections are just kind of set up. Then we have these 2 sheets of printed elements. These are called cut aparts, and they do get trimmed into individual pieces. So what I did for this is I trimmed those cut aparts apart into just different sections divided by all the graphics here. And I divided them into 2 piles. So like 1 border strip went here, 1 went there, and divided them up accordingly. The smaller items, I just split them up as well. And I had 2 piles to choose from, and that worked really well for decorating my book. We're not gonna do that together today in the interest of time. And then of course we have the mat board. You'll need that as well. I'm gonna tuck away this set of all the prints and planes from 1 pile. Now let's put these pieces in the order that our instructions indicate we'll be trimming. So I'm gonna start out with the gold, and then we'll do the blue, green, and red, and those don't really matter what order. Then we'll trim this letters print, so I'll put that face down, and then the typewriter print face down, and then the mat board. So that's the big piece we have included in the craft along kit. I'm going to flip everything back over to this gold, and I like to put my paper to my left. My trimmer will be in the middle of my workspace. I'm going to stay organized with my accordion pocket file here. It has a lip on the edge, so I'm going to place that under the top of my trimmer base, and I can stay organized, and each section of the book will be pocketed into different pockets to help us work step by step. Now, if you don't have this, no worries. Just maintain 4 piles and label them A, B, C, and D. If you want to take a little Post-it note and do that, that can be helpful as well. Proceeding with this gold paper, we do need to concern ourselves with the grain direction of this paper. To determine the grain direction, you just hold by the center of an edge and just kind of study what the paper does. Is it loose and flexible when you would try to wiggle it, or is it stiff as a board? I need to compare. I'm going to rotate. Now this, you see how it's very stiff, doesn't want to move. Here, it's very floppy. So when I put this into my trimmer base, I want it to flop easily or bend easily from the left to the right, going this direction, okay? And when the grain direction does matter, I will indicate that in your instructions. So there will be an arrow pointing left or right. And let's trim this paper at 5 3/4. If you're new to the trimmer, just remember the top row of numbers are centimeters, second row of numbers are inches. Once you find your whole number, in this case 5, I like to go left then to grow that number. So 5 1/4, 5 1/2, 5 3/4, and the trimmer base has those handy vertical columns. Stabilize on the clear bar to prevent the paper from wiggling when the blade comes down. Now as a process, what I'd like you to do is leave that paper lay where it lands while we rotate and deal with this piece first. So our next cut here with this piece rotated and horizontal will be at 11 1/4. Stabilize it again, and then 6 3/4. 6 3/4. Now this piece and the one that just fell, they both go in pocket A. And then this last little guy, I'm going to put that in D, or you can put it in the circular file. The whole purpose of the D pocket is to give you stuff to decorate your book. Okay, now we're going to take this next sheet that was to the right of the trimmer blade. Let's trim this at 7 1/2. This actually ends up becoming a decorative piece, so pocket D as in Delta. And we have this last rectangle that fell. We're going to trim that horizontally at 5, 3 3/4, and 2 1/2. This larger piece here, D, the D pocket, and then the smaller pieces, we're going to set these aside in a different pile, not in a file yet, not in a pocket, but in a pile separate to be scored in just a minute. For this next sheet of paper, I'm going to go with red, and I'm going to push on it to determine the grain direction. You know, this is very stiff. This bends easily. In And that's how I want it going into the trimmer base. Bending easily this time from the top of the trimmer to the bottom of the trimmer. Let's cut at 10 and 5. The two larger pieces that you made should be the same size. Set them aside to be scored. They'll grow up to become inside pages. And then this little strip here we'll put in pocket D for more decorative potential. And let's check the grain direction on this blue. I want it dipping again, top to bottom. And then we're gonna grab the green right away too and trim at the same time. Dipping top to bottom. Let's cut at 10. Make sure you stabilize when you're doing 2 sheets at a time. And then 5. You can really hear the trimmer work hard, earn its keep. Okay, let's take these larger strips, set them aside, and then the narrow strips go in the D pocket. For this next trimming process, think in terms of the top of the print, what you feel to be the top of the print being on the left edge. And this is pretty flexible, so it doesn't really matter, but ideally the top of the print would be there, especially if it has script, you know, like text running in a certain direction. We'll cut this at 11 1/4 and 6 3/4. So again, make sure you go to the left to grow that number to 6 3/4. And then a rotate. Let's see, I think I'm going to go this way with it just because of what I have in mind here. I'm going to go 8 1/2. So just rotate and go 8 1/2 and 4 1/4. And I'm going to take these 2 pieces that are the same size and place them in pocket A. Then there's another piece that we can trim. I'm going to go this way with it. Again, it doesn't really matter so much. And I'll cut this one horizontally at 4 3/4. Place this larger piece you made in pocket C. And the smaller one goes in D. D as in Delta. Then you have a long strip here. We'll cut it at 10 and 5. Both of these pieces can be placed the same. The ones that are the same go in pocket A. And then the little piece that fell off the end, D. And here we are at our typewriter print. Let's see, a section of this will become a scrap. So you can kind of see that in the diagram. There's this long strip on the edge here. So just decide what you want your scrap to be. I'm going to have it go off this edge here, and I'll trim at 9 1/2 and 4 3/4. And you have 2 pieces that are the same. Now, sometimes this can be a little slippery, so we're going to trim at the same time. My tip is put the paper prints back to back, and we'll cut at 10 1/2, 7, and 3 1/2. Now you just made a whole bunch of pieces that are all the same size. There should be 6 of them, and place them all in pocket C. There will be 2 little narrow pieces that fell off the end, D for decorating, and then here's your scrap. Almost done with all of our trimming. All that's left is this sheet of mat board, and it's pretty thick, but I think the trimmer can handle it if you are just very, very careful. So I'm going to start out at 9 1/2 inches. So once you find that measurement, I want you to push real firmly down on this, maybe stand to have best success. And there it goes. Then slide down to 4 3/4. Once again, I need you to put that little muscle into it. Standing helps. Okay, now rotate this piece so it's horizontal, and we'll cut at 10 1/2 and 5 1/4. It's a little easier to do these shorter cuts. That's everything you need for one book. So I'm going to put this in pocket A, just these 2 larger pieces and the smaller. Then take the second piece, and we'll do the same thing. 10 1/2 and 5 1/4. These are the pieces you'll need for your second book. So I'll set these aside onto that pile with the other papers from the kit. And this is a scrap, as well as, I guess I did find one more little scrap here. We'll put all that in pocket D just in case we decide we want to use that for any reason. Next, I'm going to swap out my trimmer for a score pal. Remember when we set aside all those long strips? We're going to score them all the same measurements. So place one of the strips into your score pal so it's horizontal. I'm working with a metal tip stylus to do the scoring. I prefer it over the little tool that comes with the score pal. And we'll score this at 3 3/4 and 8 1/4. Now, if you're new to scoring, I always make sure that the most prominent texture side of the paper is facing up if the paper does have a texture. And I always like to hold my tool like a pencil rather than with that overhanded grip. It gives you a little more control over the pressure. The amount of pressure you use when you're scoring should depend on the weight of the paper. This is a pretty heavy paper. 3 3/4, 8 1/4. If you don't find that you've applied enough pressure and you don't have a very heavy score line, then you can just make a second pass. 3 3/4, 8 1/4. Here's that heavier blue again. 3 3/4, 8 1/4. Then we have the red, also quite heavy. 3 3/4, 8 1/4. And you'll learn quickly, if your hand is too heavy with the scoring, you'll end up tearing the paper. We want to avoid that. I'd rather have you make 2 passes. Again, that was 3 3/4 and 8 1/4. All of these long scored pieces can be added to your folio in pocket B. When I place them in there, I just do it kind of at an angle so I can still see that letter. Now we have these little guys. These are going to become our little hinges for our book, and they need to be scored at 1/2 of an inch and 3/4. That was 1/2 and 3/4. Now you'll notice I'm right-handed, and this was kind of a little bit of an awkward experience, so I have an alternative. If you're left-handed, you can do it at that measurement, but if you're right-handed, you could also bring it over here to the upper right corner of the board and score at 11 1/4 and 11 1/2. 11 1/4 and 11 1/2, just a little easier. But if you're over here, 1/2 and 3/4. The results are the same. It's just that can be a little more comfortable if you score on the right edge for these little pieces. Pocket these all in A, and we're finished scoring. We can begin the next phase by taking things out of pocket A. It's kind of nice that all these other pieces aren't interfering with our progress. We just have what we need right here to get things started. When we study the pieces that came out of that pocket, look for the largest plain sheet of paper. So I can just tell right away, that's going to be this guy, this big piece of gold. Yours might be a different color depending on what you decided to do. We're also going to be working with our mat board covers and our mat board spine for starters. So we can just set those aside a little bit further away. This is a great time to have one of our grid rulers. I love this 3x14 grid ruler. It's a very useful tool. If you don't already have one, consider picking one up. It will make you a better crafter. Well, knowing how to use it will also make you a better crafter. We need to make a line on our paper here. So what's important for starters is that this paper is positioned vertically. So if I just look, the height of this is 6 3/4 of an inch. And again, this is the outside spine cover of our book. We need to make a line 1 inch from the bottom edge of this piece of paper. The traditional way to do that would be to find an inch and mark, and then connect those lines. This ruler makes this job a lot easier. Now, every cube on this ruler, every box, whether it's formed by a straight line or a dotted line or a dashed line, each cube is 1/8 of an inch. Therefore, 8 cubes equals an inch. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's 8 cubes. This solid line here is an inch. So if I rest that inch line along the bottom edge of my paper, I'm exactly an inch from the bottom, and all I have to do is draw that line. I know it took me a little more time to explain that, but I think it's worth knowing this little skill. So I know this is an inch, and if you want to double check, you can just compare, and sure enough, there it is. The next line I need to draw, keeping in mind this is vertical, so important. I saw it in a live workshop. A lot of people accidentally had it horizontal. We don't want that. We need to measure now 2 inches from this left edge. So if 8 cubes is an inch, 16 cubes is 2 inches, and it's kind of handy because I know this is 1 and this is 2. As long as that 2-inch line is matched up with the edge of my paper, nice and straight, I know I'll have a straight, perfect 2-inch line. Let's double check. Yes, 2 inches. That's what we want. So try to use the ruler correctly and then confirm your suspicions. You've got your 2 inches right here, and now we've got things lined up just the way we want it. Next up, set this aside for now and grab the 2 covers that you made. These are, let's see, they are 5 1/4 by 4 3/4. Position one of the covers on your work surface so it's horizontal, meaning like landscape style, so that the width is 5 1/4. I want you to measure again at 2 inches from the edge. So you get some practice at this new skill. 2 inches from the edge, make your line. I have a smaller 2 by 8 ruler and an 8 by 8 ruler as well as part of this line. I use each one for different purposes. It's all really helps me improve my craft. So now I have a line 2 inches from the short edge of each of these little covers here. It will all make sense very soon, I promise. Okay, now it's time to do a little bit of gluing. So I have the foam brush that came in the crafting kit, as well as you'll need some of our bookbinding glue. And we are going to apply glue to this 2 inch marked area and drop it down where these lines intersect right here. Okay, that's why we have lines on here and here, because I'll be flying blind when I add this to the paper. So after applying some glue to the 2 inch marked area, I'm holding this off of my work surface, and I'm going to take the tip of my brush here and go along that pencil line nice and smooth, and then fan the glue out to the outer edges. And it's important that you work relatively quickly here, and it helps that I've had a lot of practice. Just be patient with yourself. You don't want too much glue, but you want it thoroughly covered. So take a look at the shine here. It's looking pretty good. I'm going to turn it over. So here's my glued area. That's my landing zone. I'm going to aim right here for this corner and rest that paper along the pencil line and then drop it down. Once I have that lined up pretty well, I'll drop that down and I can just inspect my work. I'm right on that line. Do you see how close I got? Very pleased with that. That's absolutely fine. So let me just show you where we're headed. This is where we're starting, okay? So this is going to become this, all right? Just so you know, we're making the outside cover. Flipping back over to where we were working, I'm going to place my ruler now on the bottom edge of this and studying my cubes. Remember I said that a cube, it consists of either a solid or a dashed line. It doesn't matter. That's one box on the ruler. So my spine of my book needs to be placed 1 cube away from the cover, this cover, 1 cube. That area right there is called the gutter. Without a gutter, your book will not open and close properly, or if the gutter is too narrow, the paper will rip. If the gutter is too wide, the book will be really floppy, all right? Not saying that I haven't glued a cover down incorrectly in my life, and if that happens to you on your first book, well, good news. You get to make a second book and get it right the second time. That's the nice part about this project. You're going to improve your skills so much just from your first book to your second book. Okay, so I'm going to drop this glued piece down right next to my first cover, but with 1/8 of an inch gap, 1 cube. I'm trying to make sure the gap is the same size at the top as it was at the bottom. My ruler helps me do that. Now I can apply glue to this 2 inch marked area. Be careful that you don't do the wider area. And pick up the glue from the pile here and run it along the pencil line and spread the glue to the rest of it. I always try to work again with my board off of my tabletop so I don't get glue all over the table or my work surface. If you have to work with it down, just put scrap paper down. And I always try to set my brush down in the same spot. Turn that back over again. This time I'm shooting again for that 1/8 of an inch. Now I might be a little off when I flip this over. I might not be right on that pencil line, but that's okay. It's just to give us a kind of a general idea. We're gonna hope for the best. Oh, looks beautiful. Now, if you wanna do a little burnishing, what I like to do sometimes is just cover the project with my instructions and give it a burnish so that the glue bonds really well with our paper and the board. Using my instructions as a barrier prevents the paper from being scarred in any way. And look at this. You can see how this will become the spine of our book. The covers are attached and it functions beautifully. Now we need to cover these remaining exposed sides. So you'll have your spine paper on the outside and 2 empty spots. From the A pocket, we're going to now reach for the 2 larger pieces of paper here. And you can determine where they go. Like maybe I want this to be the front cover, and maybe I want this T. Oh, I'm going to put T in the front. T for Trisha. There we go. I'll probably end up covering it anyway, but this is how I want my book to be situated. I've decided. So again, like I said, it didn't really matter in this case so much because it works any old way. The way to complete this part of the process would be to apply some glue to one of the covers, holding it off of my work surface, and once again, using that tip of my foam brush, I'll use it to run it along the seam, right where that spine paper meets the board. Then fan to the outer edges. And again, avoid making these little painty strokes. You want to be like, you're putting the landscape on. You're not putting the little leaves on trees here. And I'm going to show you a trick here. So to add to this cover, I'm sliding across the spine until it drops and clicks into place. This is a skill, wrapping a cover like this is a skill you will apply again and again. And once you figure out how to calculate your own measurements for boards, I always just add 1 inch for a top and bottom flap, another inch for a side flap. And I typically draw my plans out on graph paper so that my book projects really turn out well, even on my first try a lot of times. Sometimes it doesn't always work out, but then I just go and make another one, try not to get discouraged. Here again, I'm running along the seam with my brush and then spreading the glue the rest of the way, making sure every bit of this mat board is covered with a nice coat. You don't want drippy, right? No drippy. Avoid that. And let's see again, this is my front, this is my back. I'm going to drag and drop that until it clicks. And now I have my back cover attached here. I'll burnish that a little bit. And now I can really see how this is taking shape as a book. Next, we need to create some flaps for our book. And for that, we'll use scissors. And one of the things a beginner mistake would be to cut all the way to the tip of this corner, to miter this corner. Avoid that by leaving a little bit of paper past the edge of the tip. And that's gonna really give me a chance to cover that corner properly. Now, if you're wondering, Trish, how do I really know I'm leaving enough paper? Well, this ruler happens to be 1/8 of an inch thick as well. So a lot of my newer students, they like to use the ruler like a perpendicular angle from the corner here and just draw a line on the outside edge of that ruler. See the line? I can safely cut on or next to that line and know that I'll have enough paper. That's a surefire way. Once you become a pro, like when you make your second book, you'll go, oh, I know exactly how much paper I need there. And you just miter those corners off, all 4 of them. And now we're ready to prepare our flaps to wrap around this book. So there's a really fun way to do that. I've been teaching it this way and it really seems to work well. I like to position my hand on top of the book. So if you're left-handed, you would do it this way. If you're right-handed, you would go this way. And take a bone folder, hopefully you have one of those, and just slide underneath the flap and bring it up 90 degrees. So it's standing straight up. And this flap is touching the edge of the board, and then go around and grab it with your left hand and burnish it with your right hand. Just make a nice crease. So basically you're making 2 creases. The first one is you're going upright and then you grab it and then you're going that horizontal turn here. Upright. Notice I'm working in sections. Now for my next side, I'm not going to try to do it this way. I'll rotate the book cover so I'm still holding down with my left, bringing up and over. So just up, over, and burnish. It's like a 3-step, right? Up, over, and burnish. Up, over, and burnish. One more rotation. Up, over, and burnish. So all those flaps are done and they're ready to live where they're going to live, which is down on these boards, okay? Training the paper ahead of time makes this next step so easy. Now, I already have a lot of glue in my brush because all I've been doing is basically moving glue around on the boards. So notice I'm able to, while holding this off of my work surface, I can add glue, making sure I'm getting it like next to the boards here. And I'm working with the long flaps first. Do not do the short flaps quite yet. you have to do a little prep step before you glue down the short flaps. So notice the glue is going all the way to the edges of those flaps. Now I can set my book down because there's no glue on this side, and I can bring it up and over. Get a little extra there, no problem. Up and over. Don't apply glue to this long flap too. You know, you work one side at a time. Okay, so now I have this flap down, and look how nice it stays. The glue's already dried. It's kind of mostly dry. It's ready to go. I'm just going to continue to see if I have enough glue in my brush to hit it up on these flaps here. Looks like I'm in pretty good shape. You can push the glue out of that brush. That way you can make your glue, make that many more book projects without wasting it, right? So brush, brush, brush to the edge. I always like to say magic does not make it stick, only the glue. You have to have a thorough application here. And as I wrap this around, I'm fighting the grain direction a little bit on this paper because I wanted the grain to work with the flow of the spine. So that's a little bit of a harder turn. And that's why that prep step we made earlier is so important. Burnish. And you can see, you know, this going into the spine a little bit. And your book is really starting to look nice now. Okay, so here we are with our excess paper. Deal with that by simply pushing it in to the side wall of that little mat board there. I'm just gonna push that paper in, kind of like you're wrapping a little tiny gift, okay? And then when you bring this corner around, look at how pretty those edges are. It's a really nice, let's call it a librarian corner, okay? Now, I'm pretty low on glue at this point, so I'm just gonna put a little dab in the middle. If you put it here and here, it's gonna pool there and ooze out when you press that flap down onto the book. So to the edges while holding it up. Then I can set it down and fold. And I've got a beautiful, finished, gorgeous corner. Any bookmaker would admire. And we're going to pick up all these skills and we're going to be able to replicate them with any project we want. So after tucking those in, I'm just going to add a tiny, tiny bit of glue here. Picking up my book project. It's a nice size to be working with, especially for your first book. The smaller ones are a little easier to manage rather than working with large areas that you have to glue. That's why this size is really nice. Next, I can take the other sheet of plain paper this is also still from Pocket A. And you notice it's the same width as the spine, but it's a little shorter at the top and bottom. If you try to install it vertically, it'll go past, no good. We want to install it going horizontal, and I have some tips for you here. You can work with scrap paper on your work surface and just brush it on, or if you want to do this little technique where I put it in the palm of my hand and I kind of push it in a little bit, so I call it like cupping the paper, and then I'll add some glue here, and I'm going to brush from the inside to the outside edge, from the middle to the outside, rather. So I'm brushing, working with pretty long strokes, making sure you get every bit of this paper, see? Then I can just move my hand, scoot it up a little bit, and then brush in the other direction. Now the paper will start to soften, and that's when it gets a little harder. That's why I work quickly. And as you become more well-versed at making these books, that will happen for you too. Now I'm gonna start and work from my left to my right. So I'm lining up my paper top to bottom right here. Then I'm gonna go along, and I find my first gutter. I'm just gonna push into it, then keep pushing down here over the spine, using the pad of my finger. Do not use the tip of a bone folder because you'll be likely to wreck the paper, crack it, or tear it. Just the pad or nail gently. And then you'll want to exercise that hinge a little. I can see a little bit of popping up here. I'm just going to make sure I have good bonding here. That's looking fabulous. Okay, now is a good time to add a closure. From my kit, there's some lovely colors of ribbon available to me. So I'm just going to take the gold, because I used the gold paper for the cover. There's red if you used the red or blue, whatever color you want to use. And I'm just going to trim it in half. And then I'm going to eyeball this. I'm just going to take a little dab of glue here, and I'm going to apply it to the center of the right and left edges of my inside cover. And I'll take this ribbon. Now ribbon does have a grain, so I'm going to try to do it so that the spooling direction of the ribbon cooperates with the way the ribbon will eventually wrap. And then just place that center here, extending onto the cover a little bit to give it some strength. And then check my grain here, make sure it wants to loop in the right direction. If you wanted to measure the center, you can use the 0 center of the ruler to help you. Even my cutting mat has a 0 center as well, so you could reference that too. And now my ribbons are attached. This is a step I commonly forget. So if you end up forgetting this step, you'll just have a book without ribbon closure. Maybe you prefer that. Now I'm going to figure out which way these go. I'll go this way. So these are the inside covers. So the left one is going to go here. That's the inside of the front cover. So I'll pick this up. And again, if grain direction matters, that's when you want to confirm that you're putting everything in the right direction. I'm going to do the cup it and spread it just to make sure I get a nice thorough coat. And add this so that I have equal spacing at the top, bottom, and left. And it should line up with our spine piece quite nicely. I have a little excess glue here. Put that on my pants. And I might have enough glue in my brush here to just add it to this second cover. And apply that in the same way. After burnishing, you have a beautiful book cover. Now we got to add some pages. Well, how do we do that? The last items in pocket A include our little U-shape hinges. Now these are scored, and each score line has a bump or like a divot or an indentation. The bumpy side is what goes on the inside of the fold. So I'm going to go ahead and like hot dog fold these. And one of the reasons I cared about the grain direction was because I wanted these little pieces of paper to fold easily. And if you've ever folded against the grain, you know what I'm talking about. The folds are not very attractive. They get the paper kind of fights back. And we don't want to go against the grain here. We want to be with it. So here we go. That's very nice. We got 3 lovely hinges. Now again, I want to make sure I've got my front cover chosen because we want to install these hinges from the back to the front. And that was going to give us all that nice spacing between the pages so they lay nice and flat. The best way to attach the hinge is to flatten it. And then there's going to be this bottom of the U. So if you think of this as the letter U, we want to apply glue only to that center scored area or the bottom of the U. And then when glue is applied, I like to flip it over and line up the edge of this fold with the edge of the gutter, but in the spine area. Do not glue your page into the gutter or your book won't open and close properly. So if here is my gutter, I want to make sure my page is installed next to it. A little bit of margin there, okay? So one way you can do that is just to take the glue that's in your brush, if you still have some, and rub it along this flattened U-shaped hinge. So it's much easier to do that than it is to glue it while it's like this, okay? When it's flattened, it's easy to work with. So it's just in the scored area, flip it over. So there's that folded edge. I'm going to line it up with the edge of my gutter, but not in it. It's a little hard because the spine is the same color as this paper, but I hope you can kind of see that gutter there. There's a little space, and then there's my first hinge. And then once the hinge is installed, I like to burnish, and then pick up that first flap, burnish, pick up the next flap, and burnish. And now you've got this, it's like a fin, right? Or a butterfly wing or something. It's in the shape of a U, and that's what's going to hold our pages in our book, believe it or not. Now the space between this hinge and the next one needs to be 1/4 of an inch. You can eyeball that. You can just take your next hinge, add your glue, and then guesstimate 1/4 of an inch. You could use your ruler, like down here, to just kind of eyeball that as well. That's 1/4, 2 cubes. Another option is to rest your ruler 1/4 of an inch away, so it's on the first solid line, and use your bone folder to make an indentation to follow. So that's 3 ways, and I'm not sure if you can see this, but here is my little indentation that I made with my tip of my bone folder. So another way you can add these is to take that needle tip applicator, fill it with our glue, and then you can dispense the glue onto that little center area like so. Flip it over and align that folded edge with the indentation I made with my bone folder, or 2 cubes, or 1/4 of an inch away. And remember when I talked about burnish, then open, burnish, then open the other flap and burnish. Got a little bit of oozing there, no problem. That's looking good. See how quickly that glue dries? It's amazing. Flatten the 3rd hinge, and I'll add my final strip here of bookbinding glue. Came a little past the line there. If you want to smooth it out a little bit, you could, to prevent the oozing. Okay, then flip. I'm going to eyeball this one. 1/4 of an inch. Now there's going to be another 1/4 of an inch on the other side of this hinge, and that's by design. And that's what allows those pages to have dimension on the front side. Gives you a lot of growth potential and things you can add to your book without interfering with the functionality of those pages. So now we have these beautiful hinges. Let's take a moment and number them, okay? So every flap in here has a front side and a back side. We're never going to attach anything to the back of a hinge, only to the front. So let's number them. The first one right here at the front, and you can double check to make sure. I mean, you should have a gap, and then number 1. Then the front of this flap right here is 2. The front of this next one, obviously 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so those are all the fronts of our 6 pages. Go into pocket B now. That's where all of our inside pages are living. And following our rule here, make sure the bump of the score line is on the inside of each fold. And go ahead and tri-fold these pages all individually so that they're closed like this, okay? Go ahead and do that, and I'm going to speed things up so we have enough time to assemble our book. Here are my folded and burnished pages, and notice that the bottom flap and top flap will be the same. So it's okay, we can switch as needed after they're installed. Now you can determine how you want, the order you want your pages installed. I'm gonna go red, blue, green, red, blue, green. And it doesn't really matter what order, right? But I have them sorted, and I'm just gonna turn the pile over to the back and set that on my work surface. Then get your book cover again. And let's turn to the 6th flap. Take the page from the back of the stack, since it's the back page. We'll apply adhesive to the flap and then install the page by putting this on top of the flap, making sure it opens facing you, right? You don't want to seal the page closed by gluing it backwards. I'll take my bookbinding glue here and run a little bead line onto the 6th flap here. Make sure that your page opens correctly, the trifold, and then lay it down on this prepared area. Now, I always give priority to the book itself to make sure your page is level top and bottom. Okay, make sure it's not winging out way crooked. Also, avoid putting it directly into the fold of the hinge, pretty close to the hinge, but not directly in it, because otherwise this won't open very well. I've learned that the hard way, so now you don't have to. Okay, so that page is installed. I'm going to check it from the back. It's looking really good on this side too. So page 1 is in. What's actually page 6? I'm going to flip to where I can see the number 5. And I'll add my glue from my needle tip applicator. It helps so nice to use that. Here's my blue page. Now I'm just going to put it on top of this, not directly to the edge of it, but near it. And I'm going to compare that this page is level with the previous one, but notice that the ends will have about a 1/4 inch separation, right? Because that's the distance between each hinge is a 1/4 of an inch. And I'll just double check it from the back. Looking great. Turn to the 4th page. Add my glue. You get the idea. You'll just repeat all the way through, adding the pages in the same manner, avoiding the fold here, and then double checking for level here until all the pages are installed. Well, there, now all of my pages are installed. For adhering these, I recommend just using your regular adhesive. You don't have to use bookbinding glue, and you can see that they're a perfect fit. I can alternate between different designs. So here I'm gonna pick the letterpress design and adhere that to the second page, but it's totally designer's choice, right? I'm gonna do this here and go on just attaching all 6 panels to the 6-page flaps. You'll have 1 extra flap, and that can be added, say, to the bottom of a different page, anywhere you want. So I'm going to add that right here. That's my 7th one, I believe. And now I've got this that has 2 complete flaps, and the book is ready for decorating. Everything from Pocket D can then be used to enhance the book pages. And you also have all these cut-aparts to add a whole bunch of other artwork, sentiments, journaling prompts for your book. If you'd like to make a Father's Day book out of this, I actually have another sheet of cut-aparts that's filled with all father-related sentiments. And then you have all the rest of the papers and the covers to make a second book and perfect your skills. In addition to the cut-aparts, your kit also includes a dozen photo mats if it's a monthly kit. And plus we have these other metal embellishments and a fun sheet of die-cut office things like little tabs and little mini file folders and things. So you can see here how on the cover of this book, I incorporated one of those little typewriter key guys with a cut apart, the little tab, and then an element from the cut aparts. And then each page, I was able to incorporate all the little scraps, all the little things from Pocket D to really make this an interesting and interactive book. All of those elements can be adapted to fit right onto the book to really add a lot of beautiful finishing touches. And then of course for the second book, I swapped out the gold for red, and then I swapped out the typewriter print for the letters print, and that gives me a completely different look, both to the inside and outside. So I love how the second book turned out as well. And I hope that, again, your experience will be that as you work with these techniques, you'll just keep perfecting them as you go. And one of the reasons I show you how to do all this trimming and all this assembly is so that you have the skills to replicate the project with other themes of your choice. For example, Karen, my colleague here at Club Scrap, she took this theme and used mariachi, made the beautiful books, and these were identical. She used the same prints throughout, and once again made 2 well-decorated, gorgeous little petite book duos, perfect for a little gift, right? This is awesome. And then I made one. This was before I realized you could make 2. Made one out of the Magnolia kit using our Mother's Day cut-aparts. My friend Emily had a beautiful baby boy named Brooks, and he's coming on a year old, I guess this fall. And I made this book for her with all these beautiful pictures of her darling boy and all of the mothers in his life. And I think this is going to be a wonderful treasure for her. And again, this is the Magnolia page kit with the Mother's Day cut-apart add-on. Isn't that wonderful? It's just the cutest little book ever. Now that you've watched through the entire video and you probably have a much better idea of how your book is going to come together, the best part is you can just pause and press play as you need and finish that book at your very own pace. And then don't forget, make a second one. I promise it will be even more beautiful than the first. As always, thanks for joining me for this workshop, and I hope you consider a membership to Club Scrap. We have page kits and card kits, and member pricing for those is only $24.95. Of course, if you're not a member, you're always welcome to shop. We love to have you join us as well. Looking forward to seeing you again at our